Saturday morning, 7:23 a.m. Marcus Webb pulled his Honda Civic into the driveway of the Ashmore estate on Riverside Drive, a neighborhood he would never live in, a house he had never been inside, and a garage sale he almost missed entirely. His daughter Grace was in the passenger seat, still half asleep, a homemade thermos of coffee between them. She was 12, old enough to know that her father's Saturdays weren't about pleasure. They were about survival. Every Saturday for 3 years, Marcus had woken up at 6 a.m., packed Grace into the car, and driven to neighborhood garage sales across the city, not looking for treasure, looking for what people didn't want anymore. He was good at finding the things other people threw away. A bicycle frame that could be welded, a dresser that needed new handles, a bookshelf that somebody's college kid had abandoned. He would buy these things for $5, $10, $20 at most. Then he would spend his Sunday nights fixing them in the garage and his Monday mornings selling them online for triple or quadruple what he paid. It was not a glamorous way to make money. It was not supposed to be a path to anything. But on this particular Saturday, at this particular garage sale, Marcus Webb would find something that would change the trajectory of his entire life. He just didn't know it yet. "Can I stay in the car?" Grace asked, already settling deeper into her seat. 2 hours, Marcus said. "I'll be fast." She closed her eyes. He grabbed a canvas bag from the back seat and walked toward the sale. The driveway was lined with the typical debris of a life being liquidated. Dining room chairs with wobbled legs, a collection of decorative plates. Nobody wanted a broken lamp with a cord held together by electrical tape. The flotsam of ownership. Marcus walked past it all without stopping. He was looking for something specific, something that caught light a certain way, something that made him pause and think, something that whispered of value beneath the surface. He was 3 tables in when he saw it. A violin case, battered, black with faded gold trim, partially hidden beneath a stack of old vinyl records. He lifted it slowly. The weight was wrong for a cheap beginner's instrument. Too substantial, too real. "How much for this?" he asked the woman running the sale. She was probably 70, probably had owned a lot of things in her life and was tired of owning them now. She glanced at it. "Oh, that, $2? Marcus felt something shift in his chest. $2, he repeated. "Yes, my husband played. Well, he passed 3 years ago. I was going to throw it out, but thought maybe someone." She trailed off. Marcus looked at the violin case. He looked at the woman. He opened his mouth to ask questions he didn't ask. $2 is fine, he said. He paid the woman. He carried the case back to the car. Grace didn't even look up. He set it carefully in the trunk, and he drove home thinking about nothing except the weight of that case in his hands. He did not know that the weight of that case would become the weight of his entire future. Stay with me. 5 years ago, Marcus Webb had been a different man. He had been a man with a college degree, a degree in accounting from State University, a degree that had meant something once when he was 22 and believed that degrees meant security. He had worked for an accounting firm called Meridian Financial. 9 years. Good salary. Benefits. A 401k that grew quietly in the background of his life. Then his wife got sick. Not sick the way people talk about casually. Sick the way that reorganizes everything. Sick that costs money in ways insurance doesn't cover. Sick that turns a stable man into a man making desperate decisions. He spent the savings. He spent the retirement. He spent the equity in the house. He spent money he didn't have, borrowed from family he didn't want to owe. He spent himself into a hole so deep that when she died anyway, the hole remained. 14 months of treatment. For different hospitals. 17 different doctors. And at the end of it, nothing. Just an absence where a woman used to be, and a daughter who asked every morning, "Is mom coming home today?" After the funeral, the bills kept coming. He had missed so much work taking her to appointments that his job performance suffered. He called in sick too often. He left early too many days. The firm appreciated his years, they said. But the circumstances, they said. Perhaps it was time for a fresh start elsewhere, they said. He was terminated on a Thursday. The severance package was minimal. The job market had hardened in the years since he'd last looked at it. His resume had a gap now. A canyon of absence. Employers didn't like canyons. He tried for 6 months to find accounting work. 6 months of interviews, where he could see the calculation happening behind interviewers' eyes. Medical leave, caregiving responsibilities. Would he be reliable? Could they trust that he wouldn't disappear again if family circumstances changed? Nobody wanted to take the risk. By month 7, Marcus had taken a job as a warehouse supervisor. $15 an hour. No benefits. No future. By month 8, he realized $15 an hour and rent and graces, private school and food and utilities, and the small insurance payments he still owed from his wife's medical bills added up to a number he couldn't quite make work. So he'd started looking at the garage sales. It was accidental at first. Grace wanted to go to one. She was 8, and she'd seen a poster for vintage toys. He took her, thinking it would cost nothing, maybe spend $10, make her smile on a Saturday morning. Instead, he'd bought a broken-down bookshelf for $5. He'd spent Sunday fixing it. He'd sold it for $35 on Facebook Marketplace on Monday. $30 profit. $30 that he didn't have before. That $30 became a pattern. The pattern became a strategy. The strategy became survival. For 3 years, Marcus had been a man living on the margins of other people's cast-offs, buying their trash, making it valuable, selling it back to the world. It kept Grace in school. It kept the lights on. It kept them in an apartment that was small but clean. It was not the life he'd imagined when he was 22 with a degree from State University, but it was a life. Grace had made peace with it, as children do. She knew her father got up early on Saturdays. She knew they went to garage sales. She knew he fixed things. She didn't fully understand that these things were the only reason she still had a home. She was 12 now, smart, observant, starting to ask questions about why they lived the way they did. On this particular Saturday, when Marcus carried a $2 violin case back to the car, she finally asked one. "Dad, what is that?" "A violin," Marcus said, setting it in the trunk. "Why?" "It's something I can fix. Maybe sell. It looks broken." Most things do at first. He didn't open the case until Sunday night. The garage was small. Concrete floor. Single bulb overhead. A workbench that had belonged to the house's previous owner. Tools that Marcus had collected over 3 years of fixing broken things. He opened the case carefully. The violin inside was not a beginner's instrument. He could tell that immediately. The wood had a patina that came from age and use. The strings were original. The bridge was hand-carved. The bow was real horsehair, not synthetic. Everything about it spoke of care and cost and time. There was a label inside the body of the instrument, barely visible in the dim garage light. He angled it toward the bulb. Arnolfo Giacomini, Bologna, 1947. The name meant nothing to him. He Googled it on his phone. The first result was a Wikipedia article about Italian violin makers. Arnolfo Giacomini, 1920 to 1983, master craftsman from Bologna. Known for instruments of exceptional quality. Only approximately 200 instruments known to exist. Instruments typically value between $80,000 and $400,000. At auction, Marcus set the phone down on the workbench. He sat very still. He looked at the violin again. The wood seemed to glow in the garage light. The finish was worn from use, but underneath the wear, he could see the craftsmanship, the care that had gone into every curve, every detail. He did not touch it again. He closed the case. He walked back into the house. Grace was asleep on the couch, her homework spread across the coffee table, her head tilted against a throw pillow. She was wearing the headphones he'd given her last Christmas. Broken initially, he'd fixed them. She used them every day. He looked at his daughter sleeping in their small apartment. Then he walked back to the garage and called his sister. "Erin, it's me. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay. It's midnight. I know. I'm sorry. If you found out you had something very valuable, something that could change your life, but you'd gotten it by accident, from someone who clearly didn't know what they had, what would you do?" There was a long silence. "Marcus, what did you find? Just tell me. What would you do?" "I would feel like I'd won the lottery and feel guilty for weeks about the person I'd taken it from. Then I would probably keep it anyway, because I have bills and I'm a terrible person." "Why? Good night, Erin." "Marcus, wait." He hung up. He sat in the dark garage with a violin worth potentially $500,000, and he made a decision that surprised him. He was going to have it appraised. Not to sell it immediately, but to know if what he thought was true actually was true. And then he was going to figure out what the right thing was. Monday morning, Marcus took the violin to a music shop downtown. He didn't tell Grace where he was going. He took it during his lunch break from the warehouse. He carried the case wrapped in a plastic bag, as if hiding it from the universe could somehow change what he'd found. The music shop was called Harmonic. It occupied a corner storefront in a neighborhood that had been gentrifying slowly for the past 5 years. There were coffee shops now, yoga studios, small restaurants with interesting names, places that attracted people with disposable income. The interior of Harmonic was exactly what he'd expected. Violins in glass cases, a soundproof practice room in the back, acoustic guitars on the wall, a piano in the corner, slightly out of tune. A woman in her 60s looked up from a workbench. "Help you? I have an instrument I'd like appraised," Marcus said. "If that's something you do, depends on the instrument. And the appraiser's fee is $200. Non-refundable. You understand that? $200. A week of profit from the garage sales gone." "I understand," Marcus said. He opened the case. The woman set down whatever she'd been working on. She came around the counter slowly. She looked at the violin without touching it. Then she looked at Marcus. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Garage sale." She made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a cry. "How much did you pay?" $2. She sat down on a stool behind the counter. She was quiet for a very long time. "I can't appraise this," she said finally. "Why not?" "Because I'm not qualified. This instrument needs to be evaluated by someone who specializes in Italian makers, someone who can authenticate it, someone with insurance and credentials. You need to take this to a major auction house, New York or London, not to a music shop in a shopping district in Ohio." "Is it valuable?" Marcus asked. "Yes," she said. "It is very valuable." "How valuable?" "I can't tell you exactly. Not without proper authentication. But if it's what I think it is, if that label is authentic, if the wood is what it appears to be, I would estimate somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't move. He was aware of his heart beating. He was aware of the sound of a car honking outside. He was aware of the woman watching him with something like sympathy on her face. "You're sure?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not a certified appraiser, but I've been working with violins for 40 years. If that's a genuine Giacomini from the 1940s, yes, I'm sure." Marcus closed the case. "Thank you," he said. "Wait, you should contact." But he was already walking out. He drove back to the warehouse in a state of surreal calm. He clocked back in. He finished his shift. He loaded boxes and ran inventory reports and spoke to supervisors about shipment schedules. He moved through the hours as if he were a ghost watching his own life from outside his body. At 5 p.m., he clocked out. He drove to Grace's school. She was waiting for him in the pickup line, backpack slung over one shoulder, violin case in the other hand. Grace had been taking violin lessons for 6 months. It had cost $40 per lesson, $80 for the rental violin from the school. He had made these payments reluctantly, watching his garage sale profits disappear into instruction. But Grace had asked so. Specifically, she'd heard music in a movie and asked if she could learn. He couldn't find a reason to say no, so he'd said yes. Now, watching her walk toward the car with her rental violin, Marcus understood something. He understood that the universe was not random. He understood that sometimes things fell into place in ways that couldn't be coincidence. Grace got in the car. "How was your day?" she asked. "Interesting," Marcus said. "How was yours?" "Ms. Chen said I have good ear for music. She said if I keep practicing, I could actually become really good at this." "That's so," Marcus said. "Yeah." She said most people who learn violin learn it wrong first and have to relearn it. But I'm learning correctly from the start. Which means if I wanted to, I could actually be good. Like, really good. Professional. Level good. Marcus drove in silence. "Dad, did you hear me?" "I heard you," Marcus said. "That's great, Grace. That's really great." That night, after Grace had gone to bed, Marcus made a phone call. He called a number he found for Sotheby's in New York. He explained that he had an instrument he thought might need appraisal. An Italian violin. Possibly valuable. Possibly authentic. The woman on the phone took his information. She said that Sotheby's did indeed appraise instruments. The consultation fee would be $500. The appraisal process, if they decided to proceed, would be much more. Marcus scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday. He would ship the violin to New York that morning. The waiting would begin then. 5 days of waiting to know if his life had actually changed or if he'd imagined the possibility. Tuesday morning, Marcus woke up at 4 a.m. He carried the violin case downstairs. He'd wrapped it in bubble wrap, then in a protective shipping box, then in a larger box padded with foam. He'd spent $70 on shipping materials alone. He drove to the FedEx office before work. He handed the package to the clerk. "Where's this going?" The clerk asked. "New York. Sotheby's." The clerk scanned it, processed it, charged him the shipping fee. "That'll be $340 to ensure it arrives safely." Marcus paid it with a credit card that was already carrying too much balance. And then the violin was gone. He watched it disappear into the system. The waiting began. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of checking his email constantly. 3 weeks of reading articles about Giacomini violins online, looking at auction results, seeing instruments sell for $285,000, $310,000, $375,000. 3 weeks of trying not to think about what the money would mean. Grace's school had better options. A better neighborhood. A house instead of an apartment. A future where she wasn't the kid whose dad spent Saturday mornings at garage sales. 3 weeks of wanting something so badly that he could taste it. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, an email arrived. Subject line: Giacomini violin appraisal, Sotheby's, New York. Marcus sat at his lunch table in the warehouse break room and read the email. The violin was authentic. It was a genuine Arnolfo Giacomini, created in 1947 during the master craftsman's most prolific period. The condition was excellent. The wood showed only normal aging. The varnish was intact. The repairs were minimal and professional. Sotheby's estimated value: $420,000 to $480,000. They would be honored to represent the instrument in their upcoming masterworks of the violin auction. Their commission would be 15% of the sale price. The auction was scheduled for 6 weeks away. Marcus read the email 3 times. He was aware that his hands were shaking. He was aware that a co-worker was asking if he was okay. He was aware that he was standing up, walking to his supervisor's office, and informing them that he needed to take the rest of the day off. He drove to Grace's school and checked her out early. She was confused. "Am I sick?" she asked. "No, I just wanted to spend some time with you." They went to the coffee shop that Grace liked, the expensive one that they usually couldn't afford. She ordered a caramel macchiato and a pastry. He ordered the same. They sat at a small table by the window. "Dad, why are you being weird?" Grace asked. "I'm not being weird. You are. You never pick me up early. You never just sit and have coffee with me. You're always worried about something." Marcus looked at his daughter. She was 12 years old and already perceptive enough to know that her father carried weight. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said. "Am I in trouble?" "No. The opposite. Something good happened." He told her about the violin, about the garage sale, about the appraisal, about the value. Grace listened without interrupting. "So we're rich?" she asked when he finished. "Not yet. The violin has to sell at auction. But yes, assuming it sells, for something close to the estimate, we would have enough money that things are going to change." "What kind of change?" "Good change. Your school could be different if you wanted. We could move. I could stop working at the warehouse. You could take as many violin lessons as you wanted. We could have a normal life, Grace. The kind where I'm not always working. The kind where you're not always worried about money." Grace was quiet. "Will we move away?" she asked finally. "I don't know. Maybe. Would you want to?" "No," she said. "I like my school. I like my teachers. I like Ms. Chen. I like my life." Marcus reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Your life is about to get better," he said. "It's already pretty good," Grace said. "If you stop being so worried all the time." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed in the dark, running numbers. 420,000 minus 63,000 in commission meant 357,000. After taxes, probably 250,000 left. 250,000 was enough to pay off all remaining medical bills, 22,000. Buy a small house, 200,000. Set up a college fund for Grace, 15,000. Give himself breathing room, 13,000. It was enough to stop being afraid. It was enough to not be one emergency away from disaster. It was enough to be a normal father with a normal life. But there was one problem. A problem that had been growing in his chest since he'd first opened that violin case. The woman at the garage sale. She had sold him an instrument worth $500,000 for $2. And she had no idea. The question was, did he have the right to keep it? Marcus spent a week trying not to think about the woman, but he couldn't help thinking about her. He replayed that moment over and over. Her small smile. The way she'd said, "My husband played. Well, he passed 3 years ago." She had sold him her deceased husband's violin for $2. She had probably grieved over it for 3 years. Probably couldn't look at it anymore. Couldn't bear to keep it in the house with all those memories. So she'd put it in a garage sale, probably hoping someone would take it off her hands. And he'd done exactly that. He'd taken something precious from a grieving woman, something that represented her dead husband, and he'd paid her $2. Now he was about to sell it for $420,000. Marcus talked to his sister about it. "You can't be serious," Aaron said. "You're going to give away $500,000 to a stranger because of your conscience?" "She's not a stranger. She's a person. A person who lost something." "Who lost something?" "Marcus, she didn't lose it. She sold it. She made a choice. If she had wanted to keep it, she would have. She didn't know what she was selling." "Not your problem," Aaron said. "That's how sales work. If you go to a pawn shop and sell your grandmother's ring for $50 because you need cash, and it turns out to be worth $10,000, that's your loss. Not the pawn shop's responsibility. This is different." "How?" "Because she didn't go to a pawn shop. She had a garage sale in her driveway, looking for neighborhood people to take things off her hands cheaply, and someone did." "You." Marcus hung up. He drove to the house on Riverside Drive. He didn't plan to. He just found himself in the car one Saturday morning, driving toward the neighborhood where he'd found the violin. The house was exactly as he remembered. A large Victorian mansion painted pale yellow, a manicured lawn, a driveway that curved. No garage sale signs anymore. He pulled into the driveway anyway. He sat in the car for 20 minutes. Then he got out. He walked to the front door. He knocked. An older woman answered. The same woman. Gray hair. Surprised expression. That someone had come to her door on a Saturday morning. "Can I help you?" she asked. Marcus's mouth went dry. "I bought a violin at your garage sale," he said. 3 weeks ago." Her eyes changed. She looked at him more carefully. "Oh, yes. I remember you. You were very kind. A lot of people just want to haggle. May I come inside for a moment?" She hesitated. Then she opened the door wider. Of course. The house smelled like old wood and dust, and something floral. Lavender. Maybe. The interior was decorated with expensive furniture and family photographs on the walls. A life lived well. "I'm Margaret," the woman said. "Marcus." They stood in the foyer. "I need to tell you something about the violin," Marcus said. "Oh, is it broken?" "I was worried it might be broken. It was Robert's, and he passed several years ago. I kept it for so long hoping I would learn to play, but I never did. So I finally decided to sell it. Even if it was broken, I thought at least someone would get use from it." "It's not broken," Marcus said. "It's very valuable." Margaret laughed softly. "Well, of course it was valuable to Robert. He loved that instrument. But valuable as in $400,000. Margaret sat down very slowly on a Victorian chair in the foyer. "I'm sorry," she said. Marcus explained everything. The appraisal, the auction house, the estimate, the Italian master craftsman, the rarity of the instrument. Margaret listened without speaking. When he finished, she was crying. "I sold it for $2, she whispered. "Yes. I was going to throw it away if nobody wanted it at the garage sale." "I know." Robert spent $40,000 on that violin. $40,000 and 15 years learning to play it. He was obsessed with it. That was his greatest love besides me. She looked up at Marcus. "You came here to tell me this," she said. "Instead of just taking the money. I came here because it wasn't right for me to have it." Margaret stood up. She walked to a photograph on the wall. An older man in a tuxedo, holding a violin, smiling at the camera with pure joy on his face. "That was Robert," Margaret said. "That was taken 2 years before he died. That was the happiest he ever looked." She turned back to Marcus. "I spent 3 years trying to sell that violin. I put it in storage. I listed it online. I contacted music shops. Nobody wanted it. Nobody even seemed to care. and I took that as a sign that it was meant to be garbage. That the violin was part of a life that was over, and keeping it just meant keeping pain. She wiped her eyes. So I put it out at a garage sale hoping someone would take it for $1 or $2, just to get it out of my house. To stop seeing it every time I closed my eyes. I have an offer for you, Marcus said. When the violin sells at auction, I'll split the proceeds with you. 50-50. It's your husband's instrument. It's only right that you share in the sale. Margaret stared at him. That's $200,000, she said. Yes. You can't be serious. I am. Why would you do that? Marcus thought about it. Because I bought something from you that I had no right to buy, he said. You didn't mean to sell it. You meant to discard it. And I bought it. Anyway, that wasn't fair. Margaret sat back down. I have 7 grandchildren, she said quietly. I've been trying to give them money for college. My son always says I've already done enough. But I never have enough. There's never enough. She looked up at Marcus. If you split that money with me, $200,000 would change 7 lives. Then that's what we'll do, Marcus said. And that's simply a transaction that should have been a victory became a partnership. Margaret insisted that Marcus join her for tea. They sat in her living room for 2 hours. She told him about Robert, about their 53 years of marriage, about the violin lessons he'd taken at age 60, about how music had saved him from depression in his later years. He would have wanted someone who appreciated it to have it, Margaret said. He would have hated the idea of it being thrown away. We're going to make sure it goes to someone who loves it, Marcus said. The auction house said buyers for instruments like that are serious collectors, people who will care for it. Before Marcus left, Margaret asked him a question. Why did you come here? Why did you tell me about the violin's value? You could have just sold it. You could have taken all the money and never thought about me again. Marcus thought about his daughter. He thought about the example he wanted to set. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be. Because my daughter is watching me, he said finally, and I want her to know that the right thing and the easy thing are not always the same, and that sometimes you have to choose right even when easy is available. Margaret walked him to the door. Your daughter is lucky, she said. I'm the lucky one, Marcus replied. The auction happened 6 weeks later. Marcus and Grace sat in their living room, watching the live stream on a laptop. Margaret was watching from her home, on a video call with them. The violin came up for auction number 73. The opening bid was $50,000. Within minutes, it had climbed to $200,000. Bidders were in New York, in London, in Tokyo, people who loved music, people who had spent their lives studying instruments, people for whom this violin represented something precious. The price climbed to $300,000, then $380,000, then $420,000, then $450,000. At $475,000, one final bidder remained. A collector from Vienna who had apparently decided this particular Giacomini was worth everything. The hammer came down. $475,000. After commission, $403,750. Split in half. $201,875 to Marcus. $201,875 to Margaret. Grace looked at her father. We're rich, she said. We're not rich, Marcus said, but we're no longer afraid. And that's better than rich. On the screen, Margaret was crying. She waved at the camera. Marcus waved back. And Grace, between them, understood something important about her father. He had been given a gift. And instead of hoarding it, he had shared it. He had been given the chance to keep all the money. And instead, he had given half away. In a world that told you to take, her father had chosen to give. And his daughter watched and learned and understood that this was what character looked like. The money arrived in their accounts on a Friday afternoon. Marcus stared at the deposit notification on his phone for 10 minutes. Without speaking, $201,875. Minus taxes would leave approximately $150,000 in his possession. Enough to change everything. That evening, he took Grace out to dinner at a restaurant he'd never been able to afford before. Not fancy. He wasn't going to suddenly become someone he wasn't, but nice. A place where the food was good and the waiters wore ties. Grace ordered steak. Marcus ordered fish. They both ordered dessert. They didn't need to talk about budgets or prices or whether they could afford it. It was a small freedom, but it felt enormous. Dad, Grace said after the food arrived, what are you going to do with your half of the money? I'm going to buy us a house, Marcus said. Not a big one, but a place. That's ours. Where we don't rent. Where we have room for you to practice. Violin without worrying about the neighbors complaining. That's it. That's it. Oh, and I'm going to quit my job at the warehouse. Grace set down her fork. You're going to what? Quit. I'm going to figure out something else to do. Something I actually want to do instead of just surviving on. Like what? I don't know yet. But I have some time now to figure it out. Grace smiled. Good, she said. Because you were always worried. Even when you thought. I wasn't looking. I was protecting you. I know. But now you can relax. It took Marcus 8 weeks to find the right house. It was in a neighborhood that was transitioning. Not rich. Not poor. Middle, the way most people lived. It was a 1950s ranch with good bones. And a detached garage in back. 3 bedrooms. 2 bathrooms. A kitchen that had been updated in the 90s. A living room with windows that caught light in the afternoon. The price was $130,000. It would leave Marcus with approximately $20,000 in savings. Plus no mortgage debt. Plus no need to work 3 jobs to survive. Grace got to pick out her bedroom. She chose the one on the corner of the house with 2 windows. One faced a tree that would provide shade in summer. The other faced a small creek that ran behind the property. Can I set up my violin here? She asked. Your violin and anything else you want. They moved in on a Saturday in late August. No professional movers. Just Marcus and his sister and Grace packing there. Minimal possessions into their car and a borrowed truck. The apartment had been so small that they didn't even have enough stuff to fill half the house. Grace didn't care. She was walking through each room, opening closets, testing the light switches, imagining all the ways she could use the space. Dad, look at this, she called from the garage. Marcus joined her. The garage was empty except for some old shelving units and a workbench that the previous owner had left behind. It's perfect, Grace said. For all your stuff. Marcus looked around. For 3 years, he'd been fixing things in garages that didn't belong to him, in the homes of people who were doing him a favor by letting him use their space. Now he had his own. Yeah, he said. It is. 3 weeks later, Marcus had settled into the house. He'd fixed the things that needed fixing, painted Grace's bedroom, set up the garage with his tools, and he'd given himself permission to think about what came next. He'd been an accountant once, but he didn't want to go back to that. Accounting had been about reducing human complexity to numbers. It had been soul-killing in ways he was only now understanding. He'd been a warehouse supervisor, but that was just survival with a title. What he was actually good at was seeing value in broken things. What he was actually good at was patience and care and restoration. What he was actually good at was understanding that things other people threw away sometimes had worth if you looked closely enough. So he opened a small business. Chen's Restoration was registered as a sole proprietorship with the county. He created a website. He put together a portfolio of his work. Photographs of dressers he'd restored, shelving units he'd repaired, bicycles he'd fixed. The business grew slowly. A neighbor needed a piece of furniture restored. She recommended him to someone else. That person needed a cabinet fixed. They told a friend. Within 2 months, he had enough steady work that he didn't need to find another traditional job. Within 6 months, he was turning down work because he was fully booked. Within a year, he'd saved enough to hire help. A retired woodworker named David who loved the work and charged fair rates. The business was small. It would never make him rich. But it made him steady. It made him content. It made him able to go to Grace's school events without worrying about asking for time off. Grace's violin progress accelerated. With the financial pressure off, with a father who was actually present, with quality lessons available whenever she wanted them, she became serious about the instrument. Ms. Chen noticed it first. Grace is exceptionally talented, she told Marcus during a parent-teacher conference. I don't say this lightly, but I think she could pursue this professionally if she wanted to. Professional musician? Marcus asked. Yes. College-level performance programs. Maybe even conservatory. Marcus looked at his daughter, who was waiting outside the teacher's office. She was 13 now. Tall. Serious. The violin had become part of her identity in ways he hadn't expected. She should do what makes her happy, Marcus said. I'm telling you she could do it at a very high level. 1 year after they moved into the house, Margaret called. She'd used her share of the auction money to help her grandchildren. 2 of them were now in college. One was starting a small business. One was traveling through Europe, something she'd always wanted to do. I wanted to thank you again, Margaret said during their monthly call. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Without your integrity. You would have figured it out, Marcus said. No, I wouldn't have. I was resigned to that money being lost. To Robert's violin being garbage that nobody wanted. You gave me something more valuable than money. What's that? Proof that good people still exist. Proof that someone could be given an easy path and choose the difficult one instead. 2 years after the violin auction, Grace sat Marcus down in the living room. I'm applying to conservatory, she said. Okay, it's very competitive. Most people don't get in. But you're going to try. Yeah, I'm going to try. Marcus thought about that Saturday morning. The garage sale. The $2 violin case. The woman who'd sold him her dead husband's instrument without knowing its worth. He thought about the choice he'd made to give half the money away. He thought about how that choice had led to this moment, where his daughter felt safe enough to dream, where she believed in herself, where she was going to reach for something difficult because her father had shown her that character matters more than comfort. Then you're going to get in, Marcus said. Grace smiled. How do you know? Because you inherited something from me. Something worth more than a violin. What's that? The ability to see value where other people see nothing. And the integrity to do what's right even when doing what's easy is available. 3 months later, on a Thursday in March, an acceptance letter arrived. From the Conservatory of Music at State University. Grace had been accepted into their performance program. Full scholarship. She would start in the fall. She would be 19 years old, living on campus, doing what she loved. Marcus looked at his daughter holding that letter, and he understood that the journey that started at a garage sale was never really about a violin. It was always about this moment. About his daughter being free to be exactly who she was supposed to be. About a single father who'd learned that integrity and character were worth more than money. About a woman who'd learned that grieving something didn't mean you had to destroy it. About a violin that had come home, in a way, to exactly where it needed to be. Playing music in the hands of someone who loved it the way its original creator intended. The house on the creek became a place where good things happened. Musicians came to rehearse with Grace. Ms. Chen started teaching out of the living room. She'd decided she preferred private students to teaching at a school. David, Marcus's employee, would stop by on Friday afternoons to pick up pieces of furniture to work on over the weekend. He'd stay for coffee. He'd talk about his own retirement plans, his own dreams that had been deferred for 40 years. You've given me something, David said once. By hiring me, by believing. I still had something to offer. You do have something to offer, Marcus said. I know that now. Before this, I thought I was just an old man nobody wanted. Margaret came to visit 6 months after the auction. She walked through the house Marcus had bought with half her money. She saw the garage where he restored broken things. She saw Grace's bedroom with the music stands and the violin case and the sheet music stacked on every surface. She saw a life that had been rebuilt. Robert would have loved this, Margaret said, standing in the garage. Tell me about him, Marcus said. For 2 hours, Margaret talked about her husband, about how they'd met at a concert, about how music had been the language of their marriage, about how playing violin had brought him back from darkness at the end of his life. He never would have forgiven me if I'd let that violin be destroyed. Margaret said, I know that now. Even though I was grieving and I couldn't see it, he would have wanted it to live, to be played, to matter. She looked at Marcus. And now it's doing all those things. 5 years after the garage sale, Grace performed her senior recital at the conservatory. It was a full program. Pieces by Bach. Pieces by contemporary composers. A piece that she had written herself. Marcus sat in the audience, a woman named Sarah beside him. They'd met at a coffee shop 2 years ago. She was a painter. They'd been together for 18 months. Grace took the stage in a simple black dress. She raised her violin, an instrument she'd purchased used, but well cared for, with money from her part-time work, and she began to play. The concert hall was silent except for her. And Marcus thought about the moment it had all begun. A garage sale on a Saturday morning. A woman in mourning. A man desperate enough to believe in luck. The violin on stage, not the Giacomini, which was hanging in a museum in Vienna, but a good instrument, well used, well loved, sang with the voice of his daughter. This was what the money had bought. Not luxury, not ease, but the freedom for his daughter to become who she was meant to be. After the recital, there was a small reception. Margaret was there. She'd driven 4 hours to attend. She hugged Grace like a grandmother. "Your father would be so proud," Margaret said. "He is proud," Grace replied. "He tells me all the time." Margaret laughed. "I meant Robert. Your father's integrity led us both here. To this moment." 10 years after the garage sale, a young woman stood in the lobby of the Vienna Museum of Art and Music. The museum had several instruments on display, including the Giacomini violin. Her placard read, "Arnolfo Giacomini, Bologna, 1947. Donated to the museum, in perpetuity by Margaret Ashmore, in memory of Robert Ashmore. 1935 to 2018, musician and lover of beauty." A young woman read the placard. She was a music student. She'd come to Vienna to study, and she'd come to see the Giacomini because it was famous among musicians. What she didn't know was the story behind the donation. She didn't know about a garage sale. She didn't know about a single father buying a violin for $2. She didn't know about an act of integrity that had changed multiple lives. She just knew that this instrument had been made with love by a master craftsman, and that it had been honored enough to be preserved. Back in Ohio, Marcus was teaching David's son how to restore a rocking chair. The business had grown. There were now 3 employees. They had a small storefront. They took on restoration projects for museums and galleries. Grace had graduated from the conservatory and was now in graduate school. She was thinking about teaching, about passing on what she'd learned. "You know what's interesting?" David's son said, running his hand over the wood. "This rocker is from the 1920s. Someone made this chair for somebody they loved, and it's been used for 100 years. And now we're restoring it so it can be used for 100 more." "That's right," Marcus said. "It's like everything matters," the kid said. "Like this chair mattered when it was first built, and it matters now, and it will matter to whoever gets it next." Marcus looked at this young man, who was learning to see value in broken things. He thought about the garage sale. He thought about the violin. He thought about his daughter, and he understood that this was the real magic. Not money, not luck, but the understanding that everything we do matters, that broken things can be restored, that what we throw away might be treasure to someone else, that the choice to do right instead of easy changes everything, not just for us, but for everyone we touch. One last moment. Marcus was driving home from the restoration shop when he passed the house on Riverside Drive, the Ashmore mansion. He didn't stop. He rarely drove this direction anymore, but he thought about that Saturday morning. He thought about walking up to that garage sale. He thought about a woman in mourning selling off her grief $2 at a time. He thought about the violin that was made by a master and played by a man who loved music. He thought about the choice to share instead of hoard. And he was grateful, not for the money, but for the moment that taught him that integrity was worth everything, that doing what was right could be harder than taking what was easy, and that his daughter was watching, and that his example mattered, and that someday she would teach someone else to see value in what others discarded, and that this was the only real wealth that existed, the kind that multiplied every time you chose to pass it on.